Other news tonight, it was an all-out assault on the state's DNA expert.
As the defense attacked the results of a test on a critical piece of evidence and the skills of the very crime lab technician who did all the work. CBS 5's Chris Schuler joins us live from the Calumet County Courthouse with an update on testimony in the Steven Avery murder trial. Chris?
Aaron, mistakes happen in crime labs. Evidence becomes contaminated, but according to Steven Avery's attorney, Sherry Culhane makes more mistakes than most down at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab.
You have one of the highest contamination records of anybody at the Wisconsin Crime Lab in Madison.
I don't know. I haven't counted up all the other instances of other people.
But Jerome Buting counted, telling jurors over a 2-year period between 2004 and 2006, DNA expert Sherry Culhane made many mistakes.
You, though, have 7 out of 50, which is more than the average if you divide it evenly.
But Buting claims the biggest mistake she made happened when Culhane was testing this bullet found in Avery's garage, searching for Holbach's DNA.
You don't know whether it came because you were spitting too close to as you were talking, or whether you were handling it and got it off in your hands.
Culhane's DNA showed up in that test, as well as Teresa Holbach's. Crime lab protocol required those results be ruled inconclusive. But with only 1 sample to test, Culhane made a request she's never made in her 23 years in evidence collection.
This is the only time in your entire career you have ever filed a deviation of protocol so that you could make a call and include somebody, isn't it?
Yes.
Did the fact of your profile being in the control in this case have any impact whatsoever on Teresa Holbach's DNA being on the bullet?
No.
Now, Aaron and Tom, Culhane says while she has made many mistakes, she also pointed out she does more DNA testing than other analysts down at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Special Prosecutor Norm Gahn says today was not a big blow to the state and says the jurors will be able to understand it all.
All right, thanks, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. Also today, a blood spatter expert testified about stains found in Teresa Holbach's car. Nick Stalkey works at the crime lab. He said this blood stain on the ignition area of the RAV4 could have come from a cut on Avery's right hand. Stalkey also told jurors that Teresa's blood found in the rear cargo area of the car appears to be from hair on her head. The defense will get to question Stalkey tomorrow. And for more on today's testimony and journals from Chris and Jeanette on the Avery murder trial, just go to our website, WFRV.com/Avery.
Good evening. Blaine Dassey says it was a huge fire.
The nephew of Steven Avery told jurors today he saw the bonfire behind his uncle's garage the day Teresa Holbach disappeared. Chris Schuler joins us live from Chilton with more from Avery's murder trial. Chris.
Aaron, it was testimony that supports the prosecution's theory that Steven Avery burned Teresa Holbach's body after killing her on Halloween of 2005. But according to defense attorneys, this was testimony that you simply cannot trust. Blaine Dassey says on Halloween of 2005, he saw 2 fires, one in this burn barrel.
There was smoke and flames coming out of the burning barrel.
An hour after Teresa Holbach reportedly came to take pictures of a van right after he got off his school bus.
Okay, I seen Steven walking this way, and he threw the plastic bag into there.
The other at 11 that same night behind Steven Avery's garage after getting home from trick-or-treating.
I seen Steven Avery sitting there watching the fire, the bonfire. It was about 4 or 5 feet, the flames.
It's testimony that supports the prosecution's claim that Avery burned Holbach in this fire pit where her bone fragments were found. But the defense attacked Dassey's story, pointing out in his first 2 interviews he never mentioned a fire or his uncle.
On November 7, 2005, you told the police that you actually hadn't seen Steve, your Uncle Steve, at all.
That he was constantly badgered by police.
They tried to convince you that Steven Avery was guilty, didn't they?
Yes.
But Ken Kratz told jurors Dassey's statement has been consistent since November 15th, and that his uncle intimidates him.
Recall telling investigators that you were scared of your Uncle Steven? That's the word you used, scared. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Now, Blaine Dassey later testified as well, though, that he wasn't quite sure who was by that burn pit. But again, prosecutors quick to point out that Blaine Dassey is afraid of his uncle, Stephen Avery. Blaine Dassey, of course, is a brother of Brendan Dassey, who is also charged with Teresa Halbach's murder.
All right, thanks, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. Now, Stephen Avery's brother-in-law also took the stand today. Scott Toddick testified that he saw Stephen Avery standing by the bonfire behind the garage on Halloween night of 2005. Toddick said that he had been to the Avery property that night sometime after 5 p.m. to pick up Barbianda for a trip to Green Bay. Toddick said that he had been hunting earlier in the day with a .22 caliber rifle. The defense pointed out that is the same caliber gun prosecutors say was used to kill Teresa Halbach. Avery's attorneys have said in prior court filings that they believe Toddick had the opportunity to kill Halbach. Judge Willis did not allow them to accuse Toddick.
Talk of that Halloween bonfire wasn't the only issue in the Calumet County Courthouse today. Another big issue in the Stephen Avery murder trial, records of cell phone calls that Avery allegedly made to Teresa Halbach. CBS 5's Anjanette Levy live now from Chilton with more on that testimony. Anjanette.
Well, Tom, there were a lot of fireworks over these cell phone records today. Prosecutors say these records show that Stephen Avery was trying to deceive Teresa Halbach. Avery's attorneys, of course, disagree.
On Halloween 2005, Cellcom Records custodian Bobby Dowart says Stephen Avery used his cell phone to call Auto Trader magazine at 8:12 a.m. Dowart says Avery called Teresa Halbach's cell phone 3 more times that day using the star 67 feature.
If they had what we all know as caller ID, would they be able to see who the call was being made from?
No, it would appear as blocked or restricted, private, something like that.
The prosecution maintains Stephen Avery tried to conceal his identity by using his sister's name and phone number to lure Halbach to the property. Avery's attorneys say he was not trying to hide anything by blocking his number when calling Teresa Halbach.
But it doesn't remove it from your phone bill. It still shows up on the customer's own phone bill, right?
Right.
Prosecutors believe Avery was trying to conceal his identity by giving Auto Trader his sister's name and phone number. They say Teresa Halbach called the home of Barbianda, leaving a message stating that she would be there after 2 p.m.
The call at 4:35 p.m. to Ms. Halbach's phone also says answered, correct?
Yes.
Prosecutors believe Stephen Avery placed one of those calls to give himself an alibi.
Stephen Avery told me about a year ago that he called Teresa Halbach back because he wanted her to return to the property to sell a loader that he and his, or pardon me, to photograph a loader that he and his brothers wished to sell. Today, the defense said it believes someone checked Teresa Halbach's voicemail the morning before she was reported missing. The defense says that the state did not follow up on that as a lead. Tom?
All right, thanks, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening. And for the very latest on this other news tonight, the woman who knew Teresa Halbach the best took the witness stand in the Stephen Avery murder trial.
Karen Halbach, Teresa's mother, talked about the strong bond the entire family shared and the last day she saw Teresa alive. Chris Schuler heard that testimony this morning and joins us now from Calumet County. How heartbreaking, Chris.
It sure was. You know, Karen Halbach last saw her oldest daughter the day before she disappeared at a celebration for Teresa's grandfather. Celebrated a day early so the entire family could attend. Karen Halbach hid her pain, kept her composure, and recalled all the good times with her daughter.
We did spend a lot of time together, at least once a week, and she'd come over a lot on the weekends. It seems like the kids were always over on a Sunday afternoon, and then we'd talk, sit around the island in our kitchen and talk a lot.
She testified she last saw Teresa on a Sunday, the day before she disappeared.
This was my father's birthday on Halloween, but we got together that Sunday before and celebrated his birthday at his house.
The next day, Teresa had an appointment to take a photo of a van at the Avery salvage yard the day the state claims Stephen Avery killed her.
So Teresa was actually killed on your dad's birthday?
Yes.
Karen Halbach says she only learned Teresa was possibly missing after fellow photographer Tom Pierce called.
I was worried about her then.
Saying he could not reach her by phone.
He had tried calling her on her cell phone, and it said the voicemail was full.
And that later that same day, the family reported her missing.
After the 31st of October, Mrs. Halbach Did you ever hear your daughter Teresa's voice again?
No, I did not.
Karen Halbach was only on the witness stand a little more than 10 minutes, but the prosecution hopes it leaves a lasting impression on the jury of the pain the Halbach family is living with.
Thanks, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening.
And several other investigators and experts also took the stand today, and they talked about what was found at the Avery salvage yard. CBS 5's Anjanette Levy live now from Chilton with that testimony. Anjanette?
Well, Tom, that testimony centered on Stephen Avery's burn pit, what was found there and when, and what it means to the investigation.
Special Agent Tom Sturdivant says he saw a bone fragment near Stephen Avery's burn pit, and what appeared to be bone fragments, the remnants of tires, and a piece of zipper in the pit on November 8th, 2005.
It looked like somebody had taken a big shovel from a bobcat or a front end loader and scooped out dirt and removed it and dumped it elsewhere.
They're right up there at the top of the list as far as the worst I've seen.
That's how forensic dentist Dr. Donald Simley described tooth fragments he examined. Simley said he superglued parts of a tooth together. He compared it with Teresa Halbach's dental records. Simley says it was nearly a perfect match.
When you can superimpose evidence one on top of the other and they look to be as one fragment, you can't get much closer.
Forensic anthropologist Dr. Leslie Eisenberg identified the bone fragments found in the burn pit as belonging to an adult female. Eisenberg said she examined 58 skull fragments and found 2 unnatural openings, believed to come from gunshot wounds.
My professional opinion, the manner of death in this case was by homicidal violence.
Dean Strang seized upon Eisenberg's opinion that Teresa Halbach was dead before being placed in the fire.
The burning or destruction of these bones clearly happened after death, or post-mortem, as you say.
One would hope so.
You have no evidence that it occurred before death.
I do not.
Now, Dr. Leslie Eisenberg will return to the stand tomorrow morning for more cross-examination. Tom?
All right, thank you, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening. And for details of all the tests.
Big win for the prosecution today. They introduced evidence tying a bullet recovered in Stephen Avery's garage to his .22 caliber rifle.
And Chris Schuler joins us live now from Chilton with more.
Tom and Aaron, it's called the magic bullet because it contained Teresa Halbach's DNA. Today, jurors learned it was fired from Stephen Avery's gun. One gun, one bullet, and one expert who says they are somehow connected to this crime.
I was able to conclude that this bullet had been fired from this specific gun.
Firearms expert Bill Newhouse made that connection, comparing bullets he test fired.
And this was a weapon that was submitted to the laboratory in the course of this investigation.
From Stephen Avery's .22 caliber rifle. But defense attorneys attacked, saying Newhouse didn't have proof. Supervisors agreed with his findings, and that thousands of people own this particular gun.
The Marlin 60 is or is close to the most popular .22 made in the world.
One thing Newhouse couldn't do was connect a second bullet fragment to Avery's gun.
There is some evidence for dispersal.
Also today, Avery's attorneys tried to advance their theory that Halbach's body might have been burned elsewhere and her remains then planted in Avery's fire pit. A forensic anthropologist said that was doubtful.
Based on my archaeological experience and the volume of burned human bone fragments behind the garage, I find it highly unlikely that was not the primary burn location.
And a side note, jurors were sent home an hour and a half early today because, well, you guessed it, the weather.
Boy, it is nasty out there. Thank you, Chris. Chris Schuler live tonight in Chilton.
And testimony resumes tomorrow morning.
The Stephen Avery trial could be finished. Attorneys preparing for a very important hearing.
They'll debate over a vial of Avery's blood. The defense thinks police used it to frame Avery, and tests to confirm their theory could mean a delay or even a mistrial. Let's go straight to Jesse Wells, live in Chilton.
Well, the judge has asked both sides not to comment about this story yet at this point, but the defense is asking for a mistrial. Short of that, they'd like to see a continuance to allow them to do some testing on a critical blood vial. That vial is central to their claims of a frame-up. In 3 weeks, almost 50 witnesses have taken the stand. If Stephen Avery's attorneys get their way, the trial will now come to a screeching halt. The dashboard, door frame, CD cover, and front seats. Stephen Avery's blood is found in several spots inside Teresa Halbach's SUV. The defense says the blood was planted using this blood vial found unsealed in the Manitowoc County Courthouse. Prosecutors sent the vial to the FBI for criminal testing, hoping to prove the vial is chemically different than the blood in the SUV. Avery's attorneys are asking for funding from the state to do their own testing. Until that decision, the prosecution's case is at a standstill.
Hopefully we'll be receiving rulings that not only will deal with the rest of the state's case, but may in fact shape the rest of the trial.
The defense motion says if the FBI tests are admitted, the jury would only be hearing a one-sided case denying Avery's right to a fair trial. Another unanswered issue, this bullet fragment found in Avery's garage with Teresa Halbach's DNA. A state analyst admitted at trial the sample was contaminated during testing at the crime lab. An outraged defense team called for suppression of that evidence.
It's like if you open up a microwave dinner and you see a fly in the little peach cobbler, are you going to eat the Salisbury steak?
Judge Willis is expected to rule quickly on the defense motions, or else the case can't continue. Now, at this point, the judge hasn't even decided if the FBI test being done by the prosecution will be allowed in at trial. The hearing Monday is expected to last all day. The jury could then possibly begin hearing testimony again on Tuesday. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
As Jesse said, on Monday, the judge will hear arguments from each side. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Berg says at that point, there's going to be several options.
It's a very unusual situation. The judge can either disallow the testing altogether and let the trial proceed, or the judge could allow the state to introduce the results of the FBI testing and adjourn the trial for several months to give the defense a chance to also test the sample of blood.
Now, if either of those possibilities don't work out, there could be a mistrial. Both sides have to start over from scratch.
An expert says Teresa Halbach died of 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Jeffrey Jensen says he can tell by skull fragments found on the Avery property. The defense argues there's no way of knowing if Halbach was alive or dead before being shot.
As you sit here today, you can't tell this jury whether one or both of these gunshots were made while the person was alive.
That would be correct, yes.
The defense is trying to prove there is no concrete evidence how Halbach died.
The skull fragments found are giving investigators more clues about Teresa Halbach's death. Now, the bones show traces of lead. State crime lab scientist says he can tell Teresa was shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Police confiscated a .22 caliber rifle from Stephen Avery's bedroom.
Did .22 caliber bullets contain lead?
Almost 99% lead.
Crime lab technician also examined Avery's bed for traces of rope. Did not find anything that contradicts Brendan Dassey's confession. He says Avery tied Halbach to the bed. Well, NBC 26 is staying on this breaking news.
Now CBS 5 News Weekend, working for you.
The third week of the Stephen Avery murder trial wrapped up yesterday, and tonight we will take a look back at this week's events. Avery and his nephew, Brendan Dassey, are accused of killing Teresa Halbach on Halloween of 2005. Avery had been wrongfully convicted of rape and spent 18 years in prison until DNA proved someone else committed the crime. He was arrested about 2 years later for Halbach's death. Dassey is scheduled to be tried separately. On Monday, DNA analyst Sherry Culhane was cross-examined by Stephen Avery's attorney. Culhane testified about the 6 blood stains belonging to Avery that she found in Teresa Halbach's RAV4 and the so-called magic bullet found in Avery's garage a year ago. It contained Teresa Halbach's DNA. First, Culhane faced questions about the DNA on the key.
From looking at this key and your swab and the evidence you found, you cannot tell whether the DNA that was found on that key was planted there by somebody or not, can you?
No.
If somebody did plant the DNA on that key that you found in your tests, it would look much like what you found.
Yes.
Then the question turned to the so-called magic bullet found in Avery's garage, which contained Halbach's DNA. Culhane told the jury that her DNA got into the control sample, which is used to monitor for contamination, not the sample containing the DNA washed from the bullet. Culhane admitted she had one shot at getting the profile because the sample was so small and was training 2 new analysts when the contamination occurred. Usually the test would be ruled inconclusive, but Culhane was allowed to deviate from protocol.
This is the only time in your entire career you have ever filed a deviation of protocol so that you could make a call and include somebody, isn't it?
Yes.
Ma'am, you did not disclose in that report, that official report that courts and juries and judges and lawyers and everybody else relies on, you did not disclose that in order to make that call, you had to do something so rare you've never done it before, did you?
No, I did not.
Did the fact of your profile being in the control in this case have any impact whatsoever on Teresa Halbach's DNA being on the bullet?
No.
Culhane also said that it was possible that Avery's DNA could have been planted on Halbach's vehicle key by Buckall swabs used to exonerate Stephen Avery in 2003. Avery's attorneys say the swabs were used to plant Avery's DNA. Culhane mailed those back to the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. The prosecution produced the envelope and Culhane opened it in front of the jury.
Today, as you look at that, does it appear to have been tampered or opened in any way?
No.
Stephen Avery's attorneys say the crime lab is sloppy. Special Prosecutor Norm Gahn says this contamination occurred in the sample that was used to monitor for just that, to ensure the integrity of the process and not the evidence sample containing the DNA taken from the bullet.
My blood starts to boil when this defense, I hear this, that these police officers, these good, solid citizens, good, decent men, are accused of planting this evidence.
Sherry Culhane is either an incompetent leader or she's overworked if she's making that many mistakes trying to train all these people. It's like if you open up a microwave dinner and you see a fly in the little peach cobbler, are you going to eat the Salisbury steak? I hope not. Most of us aren't.
Following Monday's testimony from Culhane, the defense filed a motion to suppress that so-called magic bullet and to strike any testimony regarding it. Jerome Buting also renewed a motion for fair forensic testing that was denied a year ago that would have allowed a defense representative to be present during testing. Buting cited the state's arguments from a year ago when making the motion.
Having a defense expert present, again ironically, would increase the risk for contamination. Now here we hear that the state crime lab brought in new trainees, which increased the risk of contamination during that critical test. It turns out that the state knew back then that the crime lab was keeping a contamination log, and they knew that at least by then there was probably 75 incidents that they had recorded of contamination. And that wasn't disclosed to the court or to the defense. It was only, in fact, that wasn't disclosed even in our original discovery request for the bench notes and lab sheets and all of that stuff. We had to make a separate independent request for a contamination log if one existed.
Also on Tuesday, Avery's nephew and Brendan Dassey's older brother testified. Blaine Dassey lived on the Avery property at the time of the alleged crime. He testified first that around 3:45 that day, he got off a school bus and while walking to his home, saw Avery drop a plastic bag into a fire in his burn barrel. Around 5:30, he left to go trick-or-treating, and when he got home around 11 that night, he said that he saw a bonfire behind Avery's garage.
There was smoke and flames coming out of the burning barrel. I seen Stephen walk in this way, and he threw the plastic bag into there.
On November 7, 2005, you told the police that you actually hadn't seen Steve, your Uncle Steve, at all.
Recall telling investigators that you were scared of your Uncle Stephen? That's the word you used, scared. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Others testified about seeing fires near Avery's trailer. Bob Fabian, a friend of Stephen Avery's brother Earl, said he and Earl were rabbit hunting that day and pulled up to Avery's trailer after 5 o'clock. Fabian said it was dark and smoke was coming from the burn barrel, and it smelled like burning plastic. Avery's brother-in-law, Scott Todick, also testified. He said that he saw a bonfire behind Avery's garage that night. Tuesday also included testimony about the cell phone records of Teresa Halbach and Stephen Avery. A Cellcom records custodian testified that Stephen Avery called Teresa Halbach's cell phone 3 times, blocking its number from appearing on their caller ID by using the *67 feature. The prosecution maintains Stephen Avery tried to conceal his identity by using his sister's name and phone number when calling Auto Trader and requesting Halbach, and that Avery called her phone later in the day to give himself an alibi.
If they had what we all know as caller ID, would they be able to see who the call was being made from?
No, it would appear as blocked or restricted, private, something like that.
It doesn't remove it from your phone bill. It still shows up on the customer's own phone bill, right?
Right.
The defense tried to plant doubt by saying that someone had checked Teresa Halbach's voicemail a day before she was reported missing. The prosecution objected.
If Mr. Buting's position, if his theory of defense is that Teresa Halbach is alive on the 2nd of November, we're entitled to know that. We're entitled to notice of that. That's my objection, is that it's irrelevant. He's about to show her some retrieved voicemails on the 2nd. That absolutely is meant to mislead this jury.
Unless the state's prepared to establish that Mr. Avery had her password, then he's not the one who's listening to her messages on Wednesday, November 2nd at 8 a.m.
Never said he was.
Somebody who knew her, somebody who may have had a motive that he doesn't have, and somebody who may have had opportunity was doing that.
Judge Willis said the jury will not hear about that issue right now, but could later. We have more coverage of... Wednesday's testimony included Teresa Halbach's mother, Karen. She was on the stand for about 12 minutes talking about her daughter and showing the jurors receipts for the cell phone, later found in Stephen Avery's burn barrel. Karen Halbach also talked about the last time that she saw her oldest daughter.
This was my father's birthday on Halloween, but we got together that Sunday before and celebrated his birthday at his house.
All right. So Teresa was actually killed on your dad's birthday?
Yes.
Right? After the 31st of October, Mrs. Halbach, did you ever hear your daughter Teresa's voice again?
No, I did not.
Was Teresa the kind of girl that would have taken off or would have left or would have vanished without talking to you or talking to her family?
No, she would not. Teresa was very close to both her sisters. You know, they spent a lot of time laughing, picking on each other. It kind of became tradition. Teresa would come over Sunday night, and their 3 favorite TV shows were on that night, and they'd watch it together and laugh and have a good time. And
the physical evidence, no matter how disturbing it's been to you, have you been and your family been kept informed throughout this investigation of all of the developments, do you feel?
Yes,
Your
we
Honor,
have.
this is needlessly difficult, and the case is not about Mr. Kratz.
The court agrees.
Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz defended his asking that question, saying jurors had a right to know that he had kept the family informed. A state agent who took custody of Stephen Avery's burn pit when bone fragments were found 3 days after the search of the Avery property started. Special Agent Tom Sturdivant said a Manitowoc County deputy discovered bone fragments in and around the pit. Sturdivant said that he called the crime lab in to help sift through the pit. Sturdivant said that he also found a piece of a zipper marked YKK, a shovel, and a screwdriver.
It looked like somebody had taken a big shovel from a bobcat or a front end loader and scooped out dirt and removed it and dumped it elsewhere.
Also on Wednesday, a forensic anthropologist testified about her examination of the bone fragments. Dr. Leslie Eisenberg said nearly every bone in the skeleton was present, and the bones were those of an adult female younger than 30. Eisenberg also told the jurors about 2 unnatural openings in Halbach's skull.
Those defects and what those defects look like signifies what happens to skull bone when it's subjected to a gunshot or gunshots.
As you sit here and on the evidence you have, one or both of those gunshots as easily could have been fired into the skull of a dead person as into the skull of a living person. True?
That is possible.
On the 4th day of week 3, firearms and tool-making experts took the stand. What they have to say about what is being called the magic bullet. That's still to come in our special half hour. On Thursday, a firearms and tool markings expert from the state crime lab testified. Bill Newhouse examined Stephen Avery's .22 caliber rifle and that so-called magic bullet. Newhouse told the jury about his findings.
I was able to conclude that this bullet had been fired from this specific gun.
This whole field, I mean, if you just Google it, you'll see this whole field is increasingly under attack as unreliable science.
Testimony on Friday focused on how Teresa Halbach died. A trace evidence expert told jurors what he found when examining Halbach's skull fragments.
I detected the presence of lead. What is the main elemental composition of a bullet? Lead.
So you didn't test the chemical composition of item FL?
No, I did not.
So you cannot say that the trace items of lead that you saw in either one of these 2 cranial fragments came from item FL. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And a forensic pathologist said he examined skull fragments and determined that Teresa Halbach was shot to death. The defense tried to cast doubt on Jensen's findings.
It would be my opinion that she died as a result of gunshot wounds to the head and that the manner of her death is homicide.
You can't tell this jury whether one or both of these gunshots were made while the person was alive.
That would be correct, yes.
Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz called Thursday's and Friday's testimony significant. The defense has filed a motion for a mistrial over that 11-year-old vial of Stephen Avery's blood. That blood was drawn in an effort to exonerate Avery of a 1985 rape conviction. He was released in 2003. Avery says the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department planted blood from that vial in Halbach's SUV to frame him so the county would not have to pay the lawsuit. That suit was settled more than a year ago for $400,000. Right now, the FBI is testing the blood in the vial for EDTA, a preservative. The defense says that testing is not reliable and the FBI hasn't conducted it since the O.J. Simpson trial. Dean Strang is asking the court to declare a mistrial or grant a continuance to allow the defense to test the blood. Strang also wants the judge to order public funding to pay for the testing. The motion will be argued Monday, and the special prosecutor talked about it yesterday.
I do anticipate that several matters will be discussed on Monday, and hopefully we'll be receiving rulings that not only will deal with the rest of the state's case, but may in fact shape the rest of the trial.
This is the second time the defense has asked for a mistrial. The jury will not report on Monday. That motion hearing is expected to last all day. And for more coverage of the
news, the judge denying a delay in the Stephen Avery trial and allowing controversial evidence that could blow Avery's setup theory out of the water.
Avery's attorneys say it's certain to set up grounds for an appeal. Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
Well, today's decision here in Chilton keeps the trial on track, even though the defense wanted to put things on hold. In a late afternoon decision, Judge Patrick Willis allows the prosecution to present FBI lab tests on Stephen Avery's blood, tests which could convince a jury it wasn't planted in Teresa Halbach's SUV. The defense does not get a chance to do its own tests.
The court believes that there are simply no grounds in this case to declare a mistrial. The primary reason that the defense has not conducted EDA testing earlier is because the defense chose not to pursue it when there would have been time to do so.
Stephen Avery's attorneys knew about this vial of blood as early as last December and chose not to get it tested. It would appear to be a fatal flaw in their defense strategy.
The one thing the judge got wrong is this assertion that somehow we made a strategic decision not to test this earlier.
Avery's attorneys say the tests from the FBI are nothing but unfair, unproven science. They claim allowing the FBI test violates Avery's right to due process and to a fair trial. In the end, the judge did not buy that argument from defense attorneys and the judge does not give them the chance to put this trial on hold for several months to perform their own tests. Either way, Avery's attorneys promised after court to go ahead with their own tests, even if it means results after this proceeding is over. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Now, before denying the mistrial, the judge decided he will allow damaging testimony from an expert.
Testimony that could help convict Stephen Avery of murder. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage. He's in Chilton.
Well, prosecutors today called it a no-brainer. If the FBI test will help prove that officers didn't plant evidence during their search of the Avery property, they say the jury ought to hear that evidence. In the end, Judge Willis agreed. Before investigators seized the Avery property in November 2005, before Stephen Avery was even arrested,
Tell me how to put it there.
Avery flooded the airways with claims he's being framed. Now it seems tests done here at the FBI crime lab in Quantico, Virginia may discredit the setup defense once and for all. The FBI test showed this blood vial, left unprotected for years in the Manitowoc County Courthouse, had a preservative called EDTA to prevent clotting. The defense says the vial was used to frame Avery, but these blood stains found inside Halbach's SUV were EDTA free.
My opinion is that the blood stains did not come from that tube of blood.
The defense also attacked the reliability of those tests, pointing out the last time the FBI did these kind of tests was during the O.J. Simpson trial.
Your Honor is being asked to join a select club. In fact, there's only one other member of the club, so far as anyone knows. And the founding member of the club is Judge Lance Ito.
Judge Willis says the best the defense can now do is cross-examine Dr. Laveau before a jury, casting doubt on the science of his tests. Now, today's ruling means Dr. Laveau, who was on the stand for much of the day, will take the stand again tomorrow, this time before the jury. Prosecutors have said they may wrap up their case by later this week. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, testimony like this has never been allowed before. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says this is a big and unexpected win for the prosecution.
To my understanding, these tests are very rare. No court has allowed the results of these tests, and there is no protocol yet accepted in our courts to allow this type of test results. This is breaking new ground.
The jury should hear that expert's testimony during the next week. And NBC 26 is staying on this breaking news story. Visit
Big trial of the day. Jurors in the Stephen Avery trial now considering damning evidence that completely discredits the defense's claim that he is being framed. Chris Schuler live now in Chilton. And Chris, they're talking about those blood test results that we heard about on Monday, right?
Right on, Tom. We all learned those test results yesterday during a hearing that was held outside of the jury's presence, held to determine if those test results could even be entered onto the record. Well, of course, the judge said yes, and today with the jury back up, blood evidence was the subject of the day. It is such a tiny tube of blood, but this expert's test results present big problems for the defense.
It's my opinion that the blood stains that were collected from the RAV4 could not have come from the EDTA tube that was provided to us in this case.
So says Mark LeBeau, an FBI scientist who said if Avery's blood was indeed planted from this vial, samples from the car would have contained the preservative.
It could not have been from an EDTA tube.
It totally discredits the defense claim of planted evidence. Monday, with the jury away, they fought to keep it off the record. Losing that battle, today they had to fight to discredit the science by going after the scientist.
Have you ever before testified in a court of law as an expert who is giving opinions about the interpretation of EDTA in bloodstains?
No.
This is the first case you've ever been asked to test for EDTA. This jury is privileged to be the first. And might that be because your lab screwed up in the O.J. Simpson case?
And Tom, also testifying today was the clerk of the Manitowoc County Clerk of Courts, where that blood vial was stored back in 2005. She said she only saw one of the two Manitowoc County deputies who are accused of planting evidence, and the one that she did saw came to her office at her invitation.
All right, thanks, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. Now, for a reaction on today's events in the Steven Avery murder trial, we take you back to Chilton. That's where CBS 5's Anjanette Levy has that part of the story. Anjanette.
Well, Tom, obviously two different takes on today's testimony from Mike Halbach and Steven Avery's attorneys. Here's what both sides had to say after court.
We certainly owe a lot to Lincoln Colburn and the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, the dive teams, the dogs, etc. The people who need to apologize to Lincoln Colburn is the defense and Mr. Avery.
Absolutely not. The evidence is what it is. Let's let the jury decide this case first, and then we'll, let's don't start waving the victory flag for Mr. Lincoln Colburn yet.
Now, Lincoln Colburn, of course, those two Manitowoc County officers accused of planting that blood in Teresa Halbach's SUV. Tomorrow morning, investigator Mark Wiegert of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department may take the stand to offer final testimony on that vial of blood. Tom?
Anjanette, thank you. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening. And to see live stream. Good evening. Aaron Davison has this night off. The Steven Avery murder trial was predicted to last about 6 weeks, and by all accounts, it is on track. This afternoon, the state rested its case, and tomorrow the defense begins their case. Chris Schuler live now from Chilton with more on this final day of testimony for the prosecution. Chris.
Tom, jurors in this case have been listening to prosecution witnesses since February 12th. Tomorrow, the defense is going to get a turn at starting its case. Now, here's a quick recap of where we've been so far. The state has called 53 witnesses over the course of 18 days and has introduced 496 exhibits as they try to prove that Steven Avery lured Teresa Halbach to his home on Halloween of 2005, where he murdered her and then burned her body. Now, the last witness they called was a co-lead investigator from Calumet County. Sergeant Mark Wiegert was witness number 53. The defense claims Avery is being framed by two Manitowoc County deputies out of retaliation for a lawsuit that he filed for a wrongful rape conviction back in 1985. Avery claims those officers planted blood from a vial of Avery's blood kept in the Manitowoc County Clerk of Court's office. Today, Wiegert testified he didn't know that vial of blood even existed until December of 2006, after defense attorneys started making those accusations. When he did, he took action.
Had you and Investigator Fossbender as lead investigators performed another or a parallel investigation as to the allegations of planting specifically by Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Colburn?
Absolutely. I mean, I felt, I can't speak for Mr. Fossbender, but I felt it was our duty that we had to do everything we could to find out one way or another whether that was true or it wasn't true.
Tom, after trial, Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz said he was very pleased with the case the state presented, especially that he could introduce scientific evidence from the FBI, clearing the good name of two Manitowoc County deputies. Those tests showed Avery's blood that was found in Teresa Halbach's SUV didn't match blood found in that vial kept in the Clerk of Court's office. It didn't match it because those stains contained no EDTA. That's a preservative. The vial did contain that preservative.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. Also testifying, Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation Special Agent Ron Pevito. Rod Pevito said that he found bone fragments snared in what was left of steel belts of tires in Steven Avery's burn pit. Pevito said tires are a good source of energy and can be used as an accelerant. Under cross-examination, Pevito said he could not determine, though, when those bones were burned. Fingerprint examination expert Mike Riddle from the State Crime Lab testified that he could not find any reliable fingerprint samples on the blood vial. He also said he found one fingerprint on Steven Avery's headboard and that it belonged to Avery. He said he did find fingerprints on items in Halbach's SUV, but not Steven Avery's. Mike Halbach was recalled to the stand today, and he told the jury that he checked his sister's cell phone voicemail box the day she was reported missing. He said it was full, and that concerned him because his sister checked her voicemail frequently. The defense had said that someone other than Avery checked the voicemail, and the police did not follow up on that lead. So now that the prosecution has rested their case, where does the case against Steven Avery go from here? CBS 5's Anjanette Levy joining us live now from Chilton with reaction from the lawyers and from our legal analysts. Anjanette.
Well, Tom, obviously everyone had a lot to say after court today. We spoke with Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz, Avery's attorney Jerome Buting, and our legal analyst. Here's a little bit of what everyone had to say.
Certainly all of the evidence that we expected to get in did get into evidence. I was happy that we were able to meet a portion of the defense, that is the defense of planting evidence.
Of course we appreciate the hurdles. We appreciated that before we ever got here. I mean, we had a lot of hurdles just trying to overcome some perceptions that people had when they first came into this jury pool too. So, but you know, all I can say is that we're comfortable with where we're at.
I think it's very interesting that they put on a very streamlined case, because some of this evidence they presented might even be considered rebuttal evidence rather than prosecution's evidence in their case in chief. So if they didn't put on that rebuttal evidence, you know, the state probably would have rested a couple days ago already.
The defense will call its first witness after 1 o'clock tomorrow. The morning will be spent arguing some outstanding motions. And the big question that's on everyone's mind, will Steven Avery testify? The defense attorneys won't answer that question right now. Tom?
Okay, thanks, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening to read courtroom journals from Chris.
The Steven Avery trial, the defense asked the judge to dismiss all charges,
including a charge of false imprisonment. Avery's lawyers insist the charge is based on nothing more than a ridiculous horror story from Avery's nephew. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
Defense attorneys to request that all the charges be dismissed against a potential defendant whenever a prosecution case is wrapped up. In this particular case, though, Avery's attorneys feel they actually have a pretty good chance of having the false imprisonment charge dismissed. That's especially because Avery's co-defendant, Brendan Dassey, did not testify against his uncle. 25-year-old Teresa Halbach is raped, stabbed in Steven Avery's bedroom, then taken to his garage and shot in the head. That's the story Brendan Dassey gave police a year ago.
It was a fable, an ugly, horrific fable.
Turns out the jury won't get to hear that story because Dassey's confession won't come into play during Avery's trial. Without Dassey's videotape confession, prosecutors were forced to drop the rape and kidnapping charges against Avery in January.
The false imprisonment count here is the last vestige of the unsupported, inaccurate, uncorroborated claims of Brendan Dassey.
Strang says aside from this car key, there's no evidence Halbach was ever in Avery's trailer.
No reasonable jury here, viewing the evidence in any light, could infer reasonably from here that Ms. Halbach was restrained or confined by Mr. Avery in his house.
Was shot in the head in Avery's garage, but Bobby Dassey testified to seeing her walk towards Avery's trailer. Kratz says that Halbach was likely forced against her will to get from point A to point B. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Jesse. The defense could very well succeed in getting some charges against Avery dropped. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says the burden of proof is on the prosecution. He says so far they haven't presented any hard evidence that Teresa Halbach was held against her will.
Without any fingerprints, without any DNA evidence showing that she was actually in the bedroom, I think the defense made a strong argument that there has been no evidence presented in this case of false imprisonment.
If that charge is dropped, Avery will still face 3 other charges, including murder, mutilation of a corpse, and possession of a firearm by a felon.
Defense is also trying to throw out several critical pieces of evidence, including a bullet fragment with Halbach's DNA recovered from Avery's garage. Defense says it was contaminated during testing at the crime lab. Now, Avery's attorneys also fighting to throw out several searches at Avery's property. Investigators used 1 search warrant for numerous searches. Defense says they should have gotten more than 1 warrant. And the judge says he's going to make a decision on these motions Monday morning at 8:30. We'll be there for that decision. Bring it to you live.
Tonight, the defense launches its case. It's trying to set Avery free by putting reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage in Chilton.
Defense attorneys called 4 witnesses to the stand today. One of those witnesses was a bus driver who claims to have seen Teresa Halbach on the Avery salvage lot the day she died.
Lisa Buchner took the stand as the first defense witness. She testified to seeing Teresa Halbach taking pictures of a vehicle at the Avery salvage yard.
I remembered that I made the comment to myself, why would anybody take a picture of that piece of junk?
She believes she saw Halbach on October 31st, 2005, while dropping accused conspirator Brendan Dassey off from school. She admitted she wasn't sure of the day. This man, John Lurkwin, saw a car like Teresa Halbach's on Halloween Day.
Did it look like it was going into the Avery Auto Salvage area or out of the Avery?
It was leaving.
Raising questions over who was in the SUV and why it was off the property. Third on the stand, Roland Johnson, who owns Stephen Avery's trailer. He claims to own the guns investigators found inside.
The defense also called the Manitowoc County coroner to the stand. She was supposed to talk about how certain Manitowoc County officials prevented her from going to the Avery salvage yard. The defense claims that's a double standard. Some people were told to stay away, some were allowed access. In the end, the judge did not allow her testimony to go before the jury. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
An NBC 26 exclusive. For the first time since the trial began, Stephen Avery's parents come together to defend their son.
Avery's father says his son was set up as payback for filing a lawsuit against Manitowoc County.
Son is innocent. After he made a lawsuit for $36 million, a lawyer told him, Stephen, they're going to get you before this is over.
Alan Avery continued to say he saw his son the night Teresa Halbach was supposedly killed. NBC 26 staying on this breaking.
Good evening. Aaron has this night off. 2 experts for the defense took the witness stand in the Stephen Avery murder trial today, and they talked about blood and bones, evidence central to the prosecution's case. Chris Schuler now live from Chilton, where that trial wrapped up week number 4 of testimony. Chris.
That's right, Tom. On this second day of the defense's case, a chemist questioned the results of an FBI test for a blood preservative, and a forensic anthropologist disputed the location where Teresa Halbach's body was burned.
I look at everything.
And when Janine Arvizu looked at the FBI report that showed no sign of the preservative EDTA in 3 samples of Stephen Avery's blood, she says she saw mistakes.
The fact that a stain, EDTA, is not detected in a stain does not mean that EDTA was not present.
The FBI created a protocol to compare this vial of Avery's blood to those stains from this SUV. That report found EDTA in the vial, but not the stains, casting doubt on Avery's claim 2 deputies planted it to frame him for murder. But Arvizu testified that while that test could identify EDTA in blood, it could not exclude it.
It is insufficient to establish the absence of EDTA.
Can you conclude then any of the 3 RAV4 stains that were examined by the FBI could not have come from the blood tube that contained Mr. Avery's blood?
I can't conclude that.
Also today, doubt about the exact site where Teresa Halbach's body was burned. The prosecution claims it was in this burn pit. This forensic anthropologist says he's not convinced.
And in your experience, is that more consistent with being a place that bones are moved to or bones are moved from?
To. So, Tom, week 4 of testimony wraps up this Friday. So far, the defense has called 7 witnesses. From what we're hearing down here, court proceedings should wrap up sometime next week.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton tonight. Now, Stephen Avery's defense attorneys talked about the testimony that their experts offered today. CBS 5's Anjanette Levy now joining us with that part of the story. Anjanette.
Well, Tom, Jerome Buting and Dean Strang talked about what they thought that lab auditor accomplished on the stand and why they didn't have their forensic anthropologist examine those bones found on the Avery property.
You can deliberately set the, detection parameters at different levels. It's just a matter of punching in a few codes. I don't know that she was saying that he was deliberately doing that. I think what she was saying is that, it's a brand new protocol, rushed out in just a couple of weeks. It's not adequately tested to figure out what the real level should be. He took some liberties, perhaps, with how far he should have gone, in his opinion.
There really was no need. I mean, these are bone fragments. There are good photographs of all of them. There was no serious question in looking at the bones that there had been, as he says, a heating event or something, a fire. No, there's no serious question about that at all. And, you have to understand that because of the way these bones are recovered, things just come in a plastic box with no way to discern what was found where in relation to anything else.
Dean Strang said he's not sure whether he'll call any witnesses on Monday, but on Monday morning, Judge Willis will issue several rulings on motions to dismiss the case and to throw out evidence. And we'll have a complete wrap-up of today's testimony coming up tonight at 10.
Okay, thank you, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy reporting live tonight in Chilton.
Developments in the Stephen Avery trial. The defense wraps its case as Avery asserts his innocence for the first time in court.
I'm an innocent man, and there's no reason for me to testify. Everybody knows I'm innocent.
A charge of false imprisonment dropped. Jurors in jeopardy of being tossed off the case. Tonight, comprehensive live team coverage on what's next for Stephen Avery, and the jury picked to decide his fate. And those jurors could begin deliberations later this week.
One thing they won't hear, testimony from Stephen Avery. NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage with more.
It is the most dramatic part of a murder trial, and it will not happen here in Chilton. The accused killer, Stephen Avery, standing up saying he will not take the stand. His attorneys say it was the toughest decision in the entire case.
I'm an innocent man, and there's no reason for me to testify. Everybody knows I'm innocent.
Those are Stephen Avery's first words in court since this 6-week trial began. The jury was not in the room.
There's a natural inclination on anyone's part to want to speak for yourself rather than having lawyers do all of the speaking.
The chance of Avery taking the stand was constantly on his attorneys' minds. Avery's past influenced this decision.
He testified in his 1985 case. He testified, and he put on 16 alibi witnesses, and he was innocent, just like he said, and nobody believed him.
The murder victim's brother calls Avery a liar.
Everything I've heard him say hasn't been the truth. No different today.
Call it untrue, but Avery's never changed his story.
So no Stephen Avery testimony here at his trial in Chilton. This case will go to the jury on Wednesday after closing arguments. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, today, at least 2 jurors admitted discussing the trial with family.
Now the judge has got to decide if those jurors violated the rules and should be tossed off the case. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage. He's also at the courthouse in Chilton.
Well, the jurors in this case are under strict orders not to watch any news reports. They're also not supposed to talk to the case to family members. Turns out 2 of the jurors may have broken those rules.
Teresa Halbach's family is tired of sitting in court. They're eager for jury deliberations to begin, yet Teresa's brother Mike says the family isn't concerned with all the talk of tainted jurors.
The 12 jurors who deliberate this case will find Stephen Avery guilty.
In a closed-door meeting, one juror admitted their spouse had told them the verdict was irrelevant because Avery's case would be appealed anyway. A second juror then alleged that a third juror was getting news updates from their spouse who would supposedly brief the juror on things not introduced at trial.
Whether that warrants some sort of corrective action. I don't know yet. The judge is taking that under consideration.
The jurors in question denied any wrongdoing. Avery's attorneys haven't asked for either to be struck.
Of course, the jury did not. One of the disputed jurors was also accused of making chit-chat with some of his fellow jurors. That's a big no-no in the case as well. But even if all the disputed jurors are dismissed from the case, the jury would still have 12 people, and that's enough to reach a verdict. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
The defense also reissued an argument to get another juror tossed from the case. A few weeks back, a female juror admitted to sitting on a case where Deputy Mark Remaker was a plaintiff. He was a prosecution witness for this trial. The judge denied a request earlier at trial to dismiss that juror. Attorneys will argue that issue in court tomorrow. It's still unclear what, if anything, will happen to the jurors in question. As it stands right now, the pool consists of 15 people. One juror was dismissed earlier due to a death in the family. Currently, 3 jurors are in jeopardy of being dismissed for either admitting to discussing the case or having a possible conflict of interest with a witness in the case.
Now, whether it's intentional or not, going against the judge's orders, it's grounds for dismissal. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Berg says it is difficult to keep jurors in check in such a long trial. Nonetheless, today's revelations about new questions about the credibility raise new questions about their credibility as a jury as a whole.
Have allowed themselves to be talked to or contacted by family members or others. It means that they have directly violated the judge's instructions that he gives every day. How can the judge trust them to follow the instructions when it becomes important in following the law of the case?
Now, if the jurors aren't tossed and Steven Avery is convicted, the defense team could have a strong case for an appeal. Now, with the intense media coverage surrounding the case, experts say they're not surprised, really, by the jurors' admissions today.
All right, it's a lengthy trial. They have nobody to talk to about it. Kyler Berge continues our live team coverage with more on that story.
Well, put yourself in the jury's shoes. You spend all day, every day hearing testimony. It's by far the biggest part of your life. But you can't talk about it with anyone, not even the people you're closest to.
Days and days of attorneys.
Let me just start, though.
Witnesses.
That's correct.
Even the judge.
You may call your next witness.
But the most important people of the trial, the 15-member jury, are the only ones who can't say a word about the case, not even to the people they love the most.
It can be very difficult, especially for people that have a very good communication style. They're talking to one another about important things in their life.
For a few of the 15, it may have been too difficult. There's information that at least 2 may have had conversations about the case with their spouse. At this point, it appears it may have been nothing more than a passing word about news reports, but it's concerning to jury experts.
It gives a terrible appearance that outside factors influence what goes on in the courtroom, even if it's just a passing conversation.
And no matter how big or small the conversation, anything a spouse says can be an influence.
If someone you really do care about, someone you do love, has an opinion about something, good or bad, pro or con, certainly it is going to provide some measure of thought, I think, on your part.
But today, each juror told the judge they weren't going to let anything but the evidence help them make up their mind.
Now, our psychologist tells me the responsibility for keeping quiet falls equally on both the juror and his or her spouse. He says any family member needs to be aware of the rules and not press the issue whenever it might come up. Kyler Berge, NBC 26, live at 6.
Thank you, Kyler. Before the jury question arose, the judge dismissed the false imprisonment charge against Steven Avery. He agreed with the defense that the charge was only added after Brendan Dassey's confession, which has not come into play at this trial. Judge Willis did deny 2 other motions looking to exclude evidence in the case.
So here is what we know. The defense wraps its case without calling Steven Avery to the stand. Both sides will deliver closing arguments on Wednesday. Also, at least 2 jurors admit to openly discussing the case with family, possibly tainting the jury pool. And the judge grants a defense motion to drop a false imprisonment charge against Avery, but denies motions to exclude evidence. NBC 26 is staying on this
Avery trial. We could have a verdict as soon as tomorrow.
That's when the case goes to the jury. Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage.
The jury gets the case tomorrow afternoon after closing arguments. How fast they reach a verdict is anyone's guess.
The Steven Avery trial will go down in history as among Wisconsin's most famous cases. And if history tells us anything, it could be a short decision to a verdict.
Most cases take hours rather than days, but it's been known to happen, particularly if there's a disagreement among jurors.
A jury reached a verdict after only 3 hours in the high-profile case against Chai Vang, accused of shooting and killing 6 deer hunters in western Wisconsin. O.J. Simpson's jury was out for only 4 hours. Jeffrey Dahmer's jury decided his sanity in less than a day, starting on a Friday and ending on a Saturday. For Stephen Avery, no one knows what the jury's thinking.
If things are very crystal clear, one way or the other, it could be a quick verdict. Otherwise, it could be a long time.
Avery's attorneys won't make a prediction. The countdown to a verdict starts tomorrow after closing arguments.
And with a trial this long, the jury might take more than an hour or two to arrive at a decision, but you never know. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live at 6.
Thank you, Aaron. Stephen Avery's attorneys trying to get a juror kicked off the case.
Now, the judge says it's not going to happen. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage in Chilton with today's developments.
The dispute today centered around one juror in this case who also served as a juror in a civil suit years ago involving one of the witnesses in this case. The defense says that juror can't give Avery a fair trial. The judge disagreed.
The blood vial, burn pit, bone fragments, blood stains, hundreds of pieces of evidence introduced at trial, almost 60 witnesses taking the stand over 5 weeks. One of them, Detective Dave Remaker. Prosecutors say the dispute about the jurors serving in Remaker's civil suit 8 years ago is irrelevant.
The case against Stephen Avery will clearly not rise or fall solely on the basis of the testimony offered by Detective Remaker.
Online court records show in 1999, Remaker was awarded thousands of dollars after being injured in a car crash. Avery's attorneys call the juror who served in that case biased by her experience.
It's asking a lot to expect a lay person in the special role of judge of the facts to decide credibility this time without considering the judgment she made about credibility the last time.
After court strikes said the problem is unprecedented in legal history.
None of us have found such a case in Wisconsin or anywhere else.
The juror in question will be ordered to set aside her previous experience with Detective Remaker when reflecting on Avery's guilt or innocence.
Now, today, the judge did not decide on 2 other controversial jurors who allegedly had casual conversations with their spouses about the case. That went against court orders to keep quiet until deliberation. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Jesse. NBC 26 is staying on this break.
News tonight, the jury had the day off in the Stephen Avery trial, but court was in session. Attorneys battled over jurors and the instructions those jurors will follow when they do get the case. CBS 5's Anjanette Levy live now from Chilton with the details. Anjanette.
Well, Tom, there's a lot at stake on all sides in this case. These instructions will be the rules the jurors will follow as they decide whether Stephen Avery is guilty or not guilty of Teresa Halbach's murder.
We could have a list of, quote, jury instructions that would go 100 pages. I mean, you could come up with an instruction for virtually every circumstance that occurs in a trial.
And attorneys for the state and the defense spent much of the day trying to do just that. Jury instructions are the roadmap jurors must follow when reaching a verdict. They're tedious and important. One point of contention, the frame-up defense.
We do not believe that the instruction should be given to the jury, that there's not sufficient evidence in the record from which a reasonable juror could come to the conclusion that there has been some planting of evidence.
I'm not going to go through the entire trial, but I think the evidence more than supports a reasonable jury in drawing that conclusion from the evidence if the jury wishes.
Judge Willis ruled in favor of the defense.
Breaking news in the Stephen Avery trial, a delay in closing arguments.
Both sides slamming the other, trying to prove Avery's guilt or innocence. Lead prosecutor Ken Kratz giving a methodical rundown of the evidence in this case.
Now, before the defense's closing arguments, lead prosecutor Ken Kratz again talking about the evidence. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage and Chilton with a look at the prosecution side of the story.
Well, for more than 2.5 hours this morning, Ken Kratz told the jury again and again that Stephen Avery, and only Stephen Avery, killed Teresa Halbach. While Avery's attorneys continue to call it a frame-up, Kratz says all the hard evidence in this case point towards Avery's guilt.
Starting with Teresa Halbach's SUV found on the Avery salvage lot, smudges of Stephen Avery's blood found inside. Ken Kratz says the jury has plenty of clues into who killed Teresa Halbach.
Again, common sense should come into play here. You don't leave that on the steps when you walk into the courtroom.
Hello, this is Teresa with Auto Trader Magazine.
Teresa's voice again rings out in court, leaving a message on her way to Avery's trailer, the last place she was ever seen alive. Her bone fragments later recovered in a burn pit behind Avery's garage, her DNA on a bullet fragment.
Teresa Halbach, by her DNA and where it's found, is telling you a story. She's telling you this is where I was. She's telling you this is what happened to me. She's telling me this is how I was killed.
The bullet fragment and these shell casings were all fired from this rifle taken from Steven Avery's bedroom. Kratz says all the evidence taken as a whole proves Avery is guilty of murder.
Now, finally, one thing Kratz admitted he couldn't tell the jury is why Steven Avery would have tried to kill Teresa Halbach. Prosecutors, though, are not required to prove motive in order to get a guilty verdict. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, just moments ago.
Breaking news in the Steven Avery trial. As we told you earlier, a delay in closing arguments.
Both sides just trying to make their point. Strong words that could sway the jury at the last minute.
Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage in Chilton.
The defense started its case late today, and they wrapped up late today. They're not even finished. They'll have to continue into the morning. Some observers would call their arguments a slap in the face of justice. Other observers would say it's just a skillful defense argument. Either way you look at it, their closing arguments have been memorable so far. Defense attorneys pounded attack after attack into the jurors' heads, even slamming an FBI scientist.
He gets the award for the most absurd expert opinion of anybody.
Attorney Jerry Buting also slammed 2 officers Steven Avery accuses of planting evidence.
There's no cop who in a Perry Mason moment breaks down on the witness stand and says, yes, I did it. I did it. You got me.
Buting slammed the way a Manitowoc County cop found this key, then slammed the prosecution for never showing the bookcase it supposedly fell from.
Where's the bookcase? Where's the bookcase?
Buting questioned how a key could fall from inside a bookcase and then land beside it. Then Ken Kratz tried to bring the case into court to explain. The judge wouldn't allow it.
This is closing argument. The objection's overruled.
And the defense will continue their closing arguments tomorrow. Dean Strang will pick things up. At one point, the prosecution even wanted the judge to yell at the defense attorneys for overstepping the rules everyone agreed to before these closing arguments began. The judge didn't want to do that. Dean Strang will have a chance to make things right in the morning. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, before closing arguments, the judge outlines the rules for the jury. Now, given all the publicity that surrounded this case, the judge reminding jurors they need to base their decision on only what they've heard at trial.
In reaching your verdict, examine the evidence with care and caution. Act with judgment, reason, and prudence. Defendants are not required to prove their innocence.
The judge also reminded the jury the state not required to prove motive in order to find Avery guilty.
Now, Chief Meat.
Breaking news in the Steven Avery trial. The fate of the accused killer now in the hands of a jury.
Closing arguments finished. Decision could come soon while a family waits for justice. The jury just finished deliberation for the day.
Kyler Berge begins our live team coverage from Chilton.
Out 4 hours, and they just finished up deliberation just a few moments ago. They'll be back again at 8:30 tomorrow morning. So that means that for the 7 men and 5 women on the jury, this decision is going to weigh on them at least until tomorrow.
When you return to the jury room, select one of your members to preside over your deliberations.
It was the jury's final instruction from Judge Patrick Willis. Select a leader to mediate the debate. Jury experts say next to the verdict, it's the most important decision.
The foreperson ends up sort of controlling the procedures that the jury uses because there's nothing from the court that tells them how to go about their business.
The 12 jurors deliberate inside a closed room. They're the only ones inside. Court staff are available to answer questions, but only if called upon. Other than that, it's only the 12-member jury for as long as it takes. All TVs and radios in the jurors' hotel rooms have been disconnected. Cell phones taken away. The judge doesn't want any outside influence to sway the verdict.
Hopefully, between the lack of available media and supervision by the sheriff's deputies, that won't be a problem.
Those same deputies who guarded the courtroom will now be posted at the jurors' hotel, 25 to 30 strong. It's the only place the 12 are allowed to be when they're not deliberating. In fact, no case discussion is to take place outside the courthouse, leaving jurors with only their own thoughts as they ponder the fate of Steven Avery. Now, we don't know what kind of progress the jury was able to make today, only that they were unable to reach a verdict. So what they're going to do, they're going to sleep on it and be back here again to start deliberations at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Kyler Berge, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Kyler. Both the prosecution and defense were able to strike one juror. The defense chose a woman they considered tainted after serving on a previous case. The jury now consists of 7 men and 5 women.
Now, before the jury began their deliberations, the judge gave them some final last instructions. The jury can find Avery guilty or not guilty of any of the 3 charges against him: murder, mutilation of a corpse, and possession of a firearm by a felon. Those charges are to be considered individually, and all the jurors must agree on the verdict.
This is a criminal, not a civil case. Therefore, before the jury may return a verdict which may legally be received, the verdict must be reached unanimously.
The judge will allow the jurors to set their own hours in deliberating the verdict. Now, jury experts say that there are 2 ways juries typically arrive at a verdict: evidence-based, where the group tries to piece together what happened, then decide, or verdict-based, where each person on the jury votes guilty or not guilty, and then time is spent convincing each person one way or the other. Now, up until the end, Avery's defense never wavered in its claims Steven Avery's being framed.
Avery's attorneys making a passionate appeal to the jurors to put aside their sympathy for the Halbach family and decide the case based on the evidence. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage with more on that story.
But Dean Strang, one of the men trying to keep Steven Avery out of prison, started talking today about the victim, 25-year-old freelance photographer Teresa Halbach. Strang reminded the jury their job is not to give closure to Halbach's family, but to give Steven Avery justice.
2003. Steven Avery is released from prison. Dean Strang arguing the justice system failed Avery once. He hopes the jury in this case doesn't do the same.
You'll set a lot of things right if you get it right here. The 1985 case won't matter so much anymore if justice is done this time.
It is absolutely
Lead prosecutor Ken Kratz called it absolutely improper for the jury to consider Avery's wrongful conviction during deliberation. To the end, Avery's attorneys never abandoned their claims that corrupt cops James Link and Andrew Colburn planted blood in Halbach's SUV and the car key in Avery's bedroom, leaving the jurors with a question.
Can you believe the police? Can you believe the law enforcement folks who are so sure that Steven Avery's guilty?
Remember, too, DNA on a bullet fragment was contaminated during testing.
Science ought to be reliable. It ought to be consistent, and it ought to be cautious. Otherwise, it's not science.
Strang fears the constant media spotlight given to the case dating all the way back to the November 2005 search poisoned Avery's right to a fair trial. A not guilty verdict he thinks would set things right.
Now, Strang also argued that if Avery is guilty, he certainly didn't act that way before he was arrested. Avery made no attempt to hide the guns in his bedroom. He made no attempt to crush the SUV. He didn't also try to hide the burn barrel. And by all accounts, he was friendly with both the media and law enforcement. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, the prosecution gets tough during rebuttal statements today.
Ken Kratz lashes out at the defense theory of a setup. He's telling the jury there's no way that it happened. Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage outside the courthouse in Chilton.
The language here in Chilton was at times strong from the special prosecutor as he made his rebuttal argument, painting a picture for the jury of a vicious murder. Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz began with this plea for the jury: don't sympathize with Steven Avery.
It is absolutely improper for Mr. Strang to ask you to in any way consider that 1985 lawsuit.
The accused killer already spent 18 years in prison on a different crime, only to be set free. Now, Kratz wants the jury to focus on the evidence in this case. He slammed defense attorney Dean Strang's theory of a police setup.
What the heck do I care, Mr. Strang, what you think?
Kratz says the defense just doesn't make sense unless the police killed Halbach. That's a wild claim, but the jury would need to believe it to believe the defense.
You've got to make that leap. because of this question right there. Where did they get the key?
He says the victim's car key is a sign of guilt, not planted evidence. Kratz told the jury to end the crazy speculation.
This case is about evidence. It's not about what Mr. Strang thinks.
And the evidence, Kratz says, will lead the jury to a clear and logical verdict.
Everything in this case pointed towards one person, towards one defendant.
Defense attorneys have said several times in this case that the evidence could have been planted without police participating in Teresa Halbach's murder. It's interesting to see that Ken Kratz played that card in his rebuttal statement. The defense could not respond to it, and it'll be interesting to see if the jury takes it. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks.
So far, the jurors have deliberated for about 4 hours.
Our live team coverage continues with NBC 26 legal analyst Jeff Wagner. Jeff, does this amount of time spent deliberating give us any clues about what the jury's thinking?
No, absolutely not really. I would have been shocked if there was a verdict this afternoon. They've only been out for a few hours. I mean, I've had cases where I thought the jury was going to be out for 5 days. They're back in 45 minutes. I've had other cases where I thought it was a dead bang winner. They'd be back in 45 minutes. They're out in 4 days. It's a dynamic that depends on the jury, how they're getting along. You really can't read anything into how long a jury is deliberating, and anybody tells you otherwise just really doesn't know what they're talking about.
All right, we thank you for your insight, Jeff Wagner, our NBC 26 legal analyst.
So here's where the trial... Breaking news in the Stephen Avery trial. Deliberation starts from scratch after a juror is dismissed.
And the jury reanalyzing a crucial piece of testimony, double-checking its facts before deciding Stephen Avery's future.
And tonight, the jury has decided to deliberate into the night.
This after the judge dismisses a juror because of a family emergency. It gave attorneys 3 options: proceed with one less juror, agree to a mistrial, or bring in a reserve juror and resume deliberations. Both sides agreed to resume. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
Well, the dismissal this morning leaves a razor-thin margin for error in the case. All 4 alternates have now been released from duty. They cannot be called back, and if any more jurors have to be excused for any reason, a mistrial is a serious possibility.
The blood vial, burn pit, bone fragments, blood stains, car key, and rifles. Hundreds of pieces of evidence have been introduced at trial. Almost 60 witnesses on the stand, some telling outrageous stories.
He wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
Others issuing denials of planting evidence.
That's ridiculous. No, I have not.
The 13th juror heard all the evidence in the case and remains sequestered here at the hotel with the other jurors. Her seat in the jury box is needed to replace a former juror who was dismissed to tend to a family emergency.
Although excusing a juror during deliberations rarely occurs, it is sometimes necessary.
The state agrees that the alternate juror who was reserved just for this unusual circumstance or occasion, that the court do just that.
The juror swap means the 4.5 hours of deliberations Thursday are thrown out.
Now, finally, the dismissal has changed the gender makeup of the jury. Initially, it was 7 men and 5 women coming into today. Now it's split down the middle, 6-6. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Jesse. The decision to use the alternate juror was approved by Stephen Avery himself. Avery consulted with his attorneys. The judge asked him several questions, making sure he fully agreed to the change.
Are you aware that you're under no obligation to join in the stipulation? That is, you have the right to require a jury of 12 and the right to request a mistrial if the juror is excused.
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that you need any more time to consider your decision on this issue?
No, sir.
Are you in agreement with the stipulation that's just been placed on the record by your attorney, Mr. Strang?
Yes, sir.
Deliberations began again just after 10:30 this morning. We're hearing new clues tonight about what the jury may be considering during deliberations.
They're asking to hear testimony from Bobby Dassey, now the one who claimed his uncle joked about hiding a body. Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage with that story. Aaron?
The jury asked about that testimony several hours ago, but so far they've not come out to hear it. There may be a good reason why.
We swear that the testimony
Bobby Dassey's testimony was long, controversial, and the jury wants to know more. Judge Willis read their request for the attorneys.
The question from the jury reads, could we please read or hear a transcript of Bobby Dassey's testimony?
Dassey dropped a bombshell on February 14th, catching news headlines across the state.
It sounded like he was joking, honestly. But he asked us if he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
It has enormous unfair prejudicial impact.
The issue was the date of the conversation. Dassey couldn't remember if it was before or after Avery went on TV and admitted his connection to the case. The judge would not read all Dassey's testimony for the jury or even give them a paper transcript.
You must continue to rely primarily on your memory of the evidence and the testimony introduced during the trial.
The judge asked the jury to clarify the exact portion of testimony it needed to hear.
And so far, the jury has not come out with that clarification. Defense attorneys say that's common and the reason why the jury may have solved the issue and moved on to other parts of the deliberation. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you.
Breaking news in the Stephen Avery trial. Jury deliberations are just wrapping up for the evening, but not before the jury asked the judge to hear key testimony about Stephen Avery's DNA. It's giving us clues about what's going on behind closed doors. Jesse Wells is in Chilton tonight. He begins our live team coverage.
Well, this afternoon, those jurors asked to hear some critical testimony from one of the key witnesses in the prosecution's case, a DNA expert with the state crime lab. But it's not what that expert found. It's what she didn't find in her test that the jurors found interesting.
This bullet fragment in this .22 caliber rifle, Sherry Culhane tested both for DNA here at the state crime lab. Her tests may prove both damaging and helpful to Stephen Avery. Culhane testified in late February the bullet fragment may have been used to kill Teresa Halbach.
I believe she is the source of the DNA on the bullet.
You may be seated.
But today, Judge Patrick Willis read some additional testimony to the jury who wondered what Culhane said under cross-examination about the alleged murder weapon, .22 caliber Marlin rifle.
Question. You did not find Mr. Avery's DNA on that weapon anywhere, did you? Answer. On the trigger guard is the only place I swabbed, but no, I didn't.
The testimony continued with the defense attorney Jerome Buting questioning Culhane about the lack of blood splatter on the rifle.
And you did not find Teresa Halbach's DNA anywhere on the barrel either? Answer. Correct.
Culhane has a long history with Stephen Avery. Her tests helped convict him in 1985. Years later, her DNA test led to his release from prison in 2003. Of course, it's too early to know what impact her tests in this case will have on his fate.
Now, before wrapping up at around 5 o'clock this afternoon, deliberations went on for about 8 hours. That's on top of 8 hours yesterday. Aside from that question, it was a very quiet day at the courthouse today. Everyone anticipating a verdict that could come at any time. The jury will resume their deliberations tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks.
The Stephen Avery trial ending tonight with a decision from a Manitowoc County jury.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Stephen A. Avery, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
Stephen Avery stunned by the news. His defense team says the jury got it wrong.
Our criminal justice system failed Stephen Avery badly in 1985. I fear this is one more failure.
For the Halbach family, an end to an 18-month-long nightmare. Teresa Halbach's killer finally brought to justice.
Teresa's not here, but we know she's here in spirit and she's smiling. She showed the jury the way.
Tonight, comprehensive live team coverage on the jury's decision, reaction from all sides, and what's next for convicted killer Stephen Avery.
This is a special edition of NBC 26 Live at 10, the Stephen Avery trial.
Stephen Avery behind bars tonight, found guilty of murdering Teresa Halbach. This picture taken just moments ago, Manitowoc County. Avery now facing a life sentence.
The jury deliberating for 22 hours before coming back with a verdict just before 6 o'clock tonight.
On count 1, the verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, Stephen A. Avery, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the first count of the information. On count 2, the verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant, Stephen A. Avery, not guilty of mutilating a corpse as charged in the second count of the information. On count 3, the verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant, Stephen Avery, guilty of possession of a firearm as charged in the third count of the information.
So once again, here is a rundown of today's verdict. Stephen Avery found guilty of murder, not guilty of mutilating a corpse, and guilty of being a felon in possession of a firearm. That murder charge, enough to put Avery away for life. Now, the Halbach family noticeably relieved with today's verdict.
Certainly. NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller has been following the case from the start. He begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
It has been a long 6 weeks here in Chilton, especially for the Halbach family. They have been here through every step of that lengthy process. Today was not a cause for celebration for the Halbachs, but rather an end to the anxiety. The process is finally over. After court, Mike Halbach greets the public with a big smile, the happiest we've seen him since his sister was murdered in November 2005. His first words were to the jury.
My family owes him a big thank you.
More than 20 Halbachs and family friends were in court for the verdict. Teresa's mother, Karen, and her father, Tom, at one point with his head down, waiting for the verdict. Brothers Tim and Mike and sisters Katie and Kelly were here. Here is what Mike Halbach thought about the word guilty.
And I started getting a little numb. And then I heard not guilty on the second count, and then I was like, wait, what did I hear in the first one?
The family reacted this way.
There were tears, there were hugs, there were smiles. There was a prayer. I think it was just a big sigh of relief.
They say Teresa was here in spirit, guiding her family, guiding the jury.
She showed the jury the way, I think.
And now it's important that Teresa lives on as a role model and that Stephen Avery spends his life behind bars.
I don't have anything to say to him, but I think he has a couple words to say to us.
An apology would be a start. Time has eased the sadness of losing Teresa for the Halbach family, but her brother Mike says the hole left in that family will never go away. Once there were 7 Halbachs in that family, now there are only 6. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Now, Aaron, you've been on this case since Teresa Halbach disappeared back on Halloween of '05. Did you find anyone surprised by the verdict today?
Not especially. I think there were a few people that thought one way or another he may be innocent, he may be guilty, but in reality, this is the happiest I've seen Mike Halbach since November of 2005. He came in with a big smile. He left the room today shaking hands with several reporters, and he gave everybody a big thumbs up as he left. He was clearly pleased that this is finally over. You have to wonder what Stephen Avery's thinking, though. He had a bone to pick with Manitowoc County from the very beginning because of his 1985 wrongful conviction. You have to wonder if he thinks he had the last laugh in this case. A lot of people think Manitowoc County's full of dirty cops, regardless of what the jury decided today, and you just have to wonder if Stephen Avery thinks that he succeeded getting back at Manitowoc County. Stacey and Bob.
All right, thank you. Aaron Keller live in Chilton tonight.
Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz got very close to the Halbach family over the last 18 months. He spoke after the verdict today, saying that the truth in the case was confirmed with the verdict.
The truth is that Stephen Avery is one of the individuals responsible for the death of Teresa Halbach. Mr. Avery, as you all know, now faces a mandatory life sentence upon the court imposing the sentence. The parole eligibility issue may still be up for discussion, but the state is very pleased that Mr. Avery will in all likelihood be spending the rest of his days in an incarcerated setting.
Avery's defense team shocked the jury didn't see things their way. Dean Strang fears another Manitowoc County jury just convicted Stephen Avery of a crime he didn't commit.
Our criminal justice system failed Stephen Avery badly in 1985. It failed him time and time again after 1985. I fear this is one more failure in spite of everyone's best efforts and honest efforts.
Dean Strang's co-counsel Jerome Buting was confused by today's verdict. He says he doesn't understand how the Avery jury split on the charges of murder and mutilation of a corpse.
It's anybody's guess how you could come back guilty on the homicide and not guilty on the mutilation of a corpse. And that's one of the things we're going to have to look at in terms of whether there might be some motions after verdict.
As you just heard, the defense has indicated they will file motions to either ask the judge to toss out the verdict or to appeal the conviction. That process could begin as early as tomorrow. Stephen Avery's family has defended him from the very beginning.
NBC 26 reporter Diana Alvear continues our live team coverage just outside the Avery Salvage Yard near Larrabee.
Well, we've been here since the verdict was announced, and I can tell you it's been very quiet here at the salvage yard. Just a couple of cars entering the property and leaving the property tonight. It seems the Avery family has very little to say. The Avery family has defended Stephen since his arrest, attending every day of his trial and steadfastly maintaining this must be a setup by Manitowoc County. After the verdict, the Avery family left the courthouse saying nothing about the jury's decision. Later that evening, they arrived back at the Avery Salvage Yard in 2 separate cars. We wanted to hear their reaction to the verdict. Is there any comment that you have on the verdict? Is there anything you'd like to say about the verdict? How is
I
Stephen
said
doing?
you're trespassing off the property.
Okay, there's no words about it you'd like
Off
to say?
the property.
Was he framed? Was this a setup? Now, the man you see speaking there is Chuck Avery. That's one of Stephen's brothers. We also stopped by the home of Earl and Candy Avery. Earl is another one of his brothers. No one was home either of the times we stopped by. Diana Alvear, NBC 26, live outside the Avery Salvage Yard.
Well, in an odd change of events, Stephen Avery has been moved from Calumet County back to the Manitowoc County Jail. The same county he accused of setting him up in a move that greatly concerned his attorneys.
Jerome Buting didn't mince words in a news conference after the verdict was read. He talked about his concern for Stephen Avery's safety.
I assume they're doing that with the understanding that Manitowoc County will be held responsible if anything happens to him. They're responsible for his safety and his security.
Stephen Avery had been housed the entire time in the Calumet County Courthouse. The move most likely to save money now, a deal Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz didn't question after so much effort had been put into keeping any conflict of interest with Manitowoc County out of the case.
I don't tell the sheriff how to run the jail. He doesn't tell me how to run my office, and that's the understanding that we have.
I don't know what else I can say about that, but should something happen while he's there, they take the risk of some very serious consequences.
Notice from Avery's attorneys that NBC 26 legal analyst Mitch Metropolis believes they will follow.
I think the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department will do everything in their power to make sure he's safe.
And Avery moved from the Calumet County Jail to Manitowoc County for the next 30 to 45 days till his sentencing is complete.
The jury elected not to address the media following the reading of the verdict today, but they did issue a statement. Michael Benner continues our live team coverage with what the jury had to say.
Stacey, we're all wondering how and why the jury reached the verdicts they did. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait for those answers.
After 22 hours of deliberations, the jury of 6 men and 6 women leave the Calumet County Courthouse and board a yellow school bus to be reunited with their families. But before getting a police escort back to Manitowoc County, the jury issued a statement through Sheriff Jerry Poggle.
We, the jury, are comfortable with the decisions that we made. We would like to express our thanks to our families and friends for their support and understanding. We also ask the press to respect our privacy and that of our family and friends.
The support network these jurors will lean on after a grueling trial.
Now, we were told the jury was going back to the Manitowoc County Courthouse to pick up their cars, but they never showed up, possibly to avoid the media attention. Michael Benner, NBC 26, live at 10.
Thank you, Michael. Having spent countless hours preparing for this day, prosecutors were pleased with the verdict.
Avery's defense team now left to look toward the future. NBC 26 reporter Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage from Chilton.
Well, the defense hasn't given up on this case. They promise that an appeal will be filed eventually. Lead prosecutor Ken Kratz, on the other hand, says he's relieved that Stephen Avery will spend the rest of his days behind bars.
Oh, hello. 2003, Stephen Avery is freed from prison after wrongful conviction. Avery's attorneys say despite the guilty verdict in this case, they worry an innocent man is again being locked up.
Our criminal justice system failed Stephen Avery badly in 1985. It failed him time and time again after 1985. I fear this is one more failure.
Defense attorney Jerome Buting whispered words of encouragement to Avery just minutes after the verdict was read. Buting says even now Avery maintains his innocence.
And I think I can say that he's obviously very disappointed, but he's not despondent, and he's not giving up.
Having called 53 witnesses to the stand, introduced hundreds of items of evidence from bloodstains to bullet fragments, Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz doubts any one fact made up the jury's mind.
The combination of evidence, that is, the amount and quality of evidence, although in large part circumstantial, was overwhelmingly so.
Avery was found guilty of first-degree intention.
Kratz reminded the Halbach family tonight is not a time for celebration. He hopes no one ever forgets this smiling face.
I hope that a part of today was an opportunity for people to remember Teresa Halbach, to remember the kind of person that she was, and we're very happy that we were able to achieve a degree, at least, of justice for Teresa's homicide.
Ken Kratz also knows he's not done by a long shot. He also has a 2-week trial planned for Avery's co-defendant, Brendan Dassey. That trial begins in mid-April. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Jeff.
The Steven Avery trial is over. A jury found him guilty of murder today.
The truth is that Steven Avery is one of the individuals responsible for the death of Teresa Halbach.
Avery, of course, was convicted of killing Teresa Halbach. Now prosecutors will try to prove he had help. Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, will stand trial in a few weeks.
And for more on that, we head back to Charles Benson and former federal prosecutor and 620 WTMJ Radio's Jeff Wagner.
That is a mouthful. Thanks. First, let's talk about the win for Ken Kratz and the prosecution. Kratz believed all the evidence pointed, in this case, to one person, even though at times it was circumstantial.
Our sense through the entire case was that the combination of evidence, that is, the amount and quality of evidence, although in large part circumstantial, was overwhelmingly so.
So let's talk about this, what you like to call the CSI factor, the law and order factor. People see that these trials are nice and neat, everything's wrapped up nice and neat on TV. That wasn't the case here. Was this hard for the prosecutor?
Absolutely. I think it's much tougher to be a prosecutor now than when I was doing it 10, 12 years ago, because people are used to seeing stuff on TV. They have certain images. I think the prosecution deserves a ton of credit. I don't think anybody can appreciate how really difficult it is to put together a case like this with this number of witnesses, this type of evidence. I think Ken Kratz, I think Tom Fallon, I think Norm Gahn, who did the DNA stuff, they did an outstanding job. Unless you've been in their shoes, you don't understand what it's like to put on a trial like this.
And you have been in those shoes. Now let's talk about what is next for the prosecutors. They are preparing for the Brendan Dassey case. Dassey is Avery's nephew. Right. He is charged with having played a role in this murder. Now he allegedly confessed and has recanted. Here's Ken Kratz.
Actually, in waiting for the verdict, this might surprise some of you, we've been working on the Dassey prosecution. We've been putting some of that case together, so using that time wisely as long as we were all together. We've already begun that process.
Okay, we thought we were going to hear from Dassey in this trial. We did not. His trial will begin next month, and the jury will come from Dane County. What do you make of all this?
Well, I think the Dassey trial is going to be much different than the Avery trial. If I were prosecuting this case, I'd build the Dassey prosecution around the confession. Now, he gave a detailed confession. I understand he's recanted it, but it's a detailed confession, which is in large measure consistent with, I think, the majority of the evidence. So I think what you're going to see happen is they'll have the confession, you'll have a lot of the Avery stuff, but it's not going to be a 5-week trial. My guess is it'll be condensed. You'll have the confession. Maybe you'll have a week or two of the expert testimony. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a different dynamic here.
Let's go back to Steven Avery. We know now that he is in the Manitowoc County Jail tonight. His defense lawyer is very concerned about that, actually sort of putting the Sheriff's Department on notice. Watch out. Be careful of him. I don't want anything to happen. What is going on there?
Well, I think that was bizarre and very, very unfortunate. I mean, he's in the Manitowoc County Jail because under the law, he's in the custody of Manitowoc County, and so it only makes sense to take him to the jail. I don't exactly understand. I think there was some sort of disappointment and bitterness about the verdict, and I think that's what came out tonight in some of those remarks.
So the next step for Steven Avery obviously is the sentencing. Any surprises there? Is he definitely in for life in prison?
Absolutely, absolutely. The judge has ordered a pre-sentence report. I don't believe the sentencing has been set yet, but it will be coming up sometime soon. He's going to get life essentially without parole. But of course, the appeal process, like we talked about earlier, this is not the end of the Steven Avery case. The appeal process is going to be going on for years, I would predict.
Well, we thank you very much for all of your insight. You've been very good on this, and you've helped us through a lot of difficult moments.
It's been my pleasure.
All right.
My pleasure.
Jeff Wagner, thanks. And we're going to be right back.
Joining us, Aaron is off tonight. A gag order has been lifted on the Teresa Halbach murder case, and tonight, members of the Manitowoc and Calumet County Sheriff's Departments are speaking out.
Now, on Sunday night, of course, Steven Avery found guilty of murdering Teresa Halbach back on Halloween of 2005. And today, Sheriff Jerry Poggle and lead investigator Mark Wiegert talked to CBS 5's Anjanette Levy about the case.
Our ultimate goal here obviously was to find the killer of Teresa, and we did that.
Investigator Mark Wiegert of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department says there was no tunnel vision when it came to finding Teresa Halbach's killer. Wiegert said the evidence pointed to Steven Avery and that none of it was planted.
I think that's something Mr. Buting and Mr. Strang have to live with the rest of their life, their attempt to dirty these two good officers for no good reason. I'm not going to say whether they should apologize or not. That's up to them.
Wiegert and Department of Criminal Investigations Special Agent Tom Fossbender led the investigation. Many agencies took part, including the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and the FBI.
I've never seen as many agencies, police agencies, work together as we did that week.
It's been a long haul, and it's been taxing.
Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Poggle has called the murder of Teresa Halbach the worst he's seen.
The public probably hasn't heard everything that we know, and it's probably better that way, that they not hear everything that we know and we've heard, and I don't think there's any reason that they need to have that information.
And for this department, the work isn't finished yet. Brendan Dassey's trial starts next month. In Chilton, Anjanette Levy, CBS 5 News.
And jury selection for Brendan Dassey's trial will start on April 12th in Dane County. Opening statements are scheduled to start in Manitowoc County April 16th.
And today, the second of two Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies accused by Steven Avery's defense of planting evidence to frame their client spoke out. In a written statement, Lieutenant James Lank thanks those who defended his integrity and also said, "I send my prayers to the Halbach family who are enduring the most difficult time in their lives. And I know that the grace of God will guide them through this as he has guided me." We also sat down with the current and former Manitowoc County sheriffs to get their take on the planted evidence claims.
The allegations and basically singling out two officers, Sergeant Colburn and Lieutenant Lincoln, actually accusing them of committing a crime, basically. And, you know, and a lot of the things that were targeting this department, that was totally inappropriate.
That whole story would make a good Hollywood movie. The only people that could move with immunity on that property were the Averys.
Sheriff Rob Herman called the allegations inappropriate and said the officers have received a lot of support from the community.
A body